And welcome back, Pokemon trainers, to the Victory Road side stream with feature matches for the Pokemon Video Game World Championships 2025. I'm Hayden McTavish, and I'm joined today, and very stoked about it, to be talking with Tyson Hughes. How are you, Tyson?
I'm doing excellent, Hayden, here, featuring some matches that you maybe wouldn't get to see here at the World Championships. Super excited to, pick up the torch that our other two commentators, left for us. And we're halfway through the day here in round 5 of our matches. And it's only going to get more and more intense here as our trainers close out their days. And that just means better games for us. So honestly, I'm super stoked to get to watch and to commentate over them.
Yeah, absolutely. With any of these global competitions, the later in the day you get, the higher the stakes rise and the more filtered the competition gets. And we've already been seeing some spectacular games so far. That last one was one of my favorites I've seen all year. And I think it's only going uphill from here. Lots of really interesting stuff to see.
And speaking of global competition here, we're going to have 2 Japanese players here featured for you in round 5. And super excited to feature Yuma and Ko. I believe Yuma on stream already with the Smeargle and the Tornadus. 2 very interesting teams, though. Hayden, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm so excited to get to showcase some of the many Japanese players who are doing really well at this tournament so far. Both of these players with some wonderful accomplishments here. I think we get a nice Calyrex Zamazenta versus Lunala Miraidon matchup, just like the national championship, the North American International Championship finals. But we've got a lot of really interesting variants to think about now. That Miracle that's been rising in popularity for the World Championships, I think gives some interesting opportunities here.
Yeah, and small changes on both teams here, even pointing out something like the Life Orb there on the Miraidon, just giving you that flexibility of something like the Protect. Doesn't seem like a big change, but being able to protect a pivotal piece like the Miraidon, your big damage dealer, is really important, especially on a team like this, where maybe you can kind of punish that swap into something like the Incineroar or the Ursaluna. With that option of Protect on the Miraidon, Ko maybe has a bit of more options to play defensively against Yuma's very oppressive team with something like the Terra Fighting Body Press on the Zamazenta, as well as a Life Orb Calyrex.
Wow, I did not see the Terra Fighting. That's incredible. There's so much damage potential coming out from that side, with the Life Orb too, as you mentioned. I think that Protect is going to be super interesting as a tool for Tsukide, but it might be a bit of a double-edged sword. Like, every time that you're spending not going for attacks with that Choice Specs boost is more opportunities for that Smeargle to set up its Moody boosts, for it to be setting up the position properly for Calyrex to be able to get Nasty Plots. And so it's going to be tough to figure out where there are moments of tempo to sort of have those safer plays against a team that has a lot of really explosive potential on Kinugawa's side.
Also, Yuma has to be very careful of what they decide to lock into, because there is a Whimsicott staring it down on the other side of the field. If Yuma does go for an off Protect or maybe tries to weave in a fake out, Ko has the option of going for Encore with Whimsicott there, and the only Pokemon that would really be able to Terastallize out of that is the Calyrex into that Dark type, and as we know, Dark types being immune to those Prankster moves would be the only Pokemon that would be maybe immune to the Encore. But other than that, something like the Tornadus or even the Smeargle being locked into a move of choice could be potentially very dangerous.
Yeah, I think Ko has a lot of opportunities to be able to really punish plays on Yuma's side. I will say, I think the Smeargle has a nice way to try to still sneak in some fake outs and be relatively safe from that Encore, because it can just go for that follow me later to sort of redirect Encore pressure on the partner and to have that priority a little bit above the Encore. Now, you can read that with the Whimsicott and Encore Smeargle on turn 1 and catch it in fake out, and that would be really interesting. But there's definitely some options, I think, to sort of navigate around that. But it's just one more thing to be thinking about in a matchup that's already pretty complex. And so having that Whimsicott as another tool is really useful.
And I think with both of the trainers having so many offensive tools as well, we're going to get to feature a lot of that damage being traded throughout the game. And I think as well, with the teams being so offensive, there's also deceptively a lot of defensive tools as well. Like Zamazenta initially getting that defensive boost, right? We see it used offensively a lot of the time with the body press is really funny, right? Because you would think, oh, defensive means, oh, it's a defensive Pokemon. So there's a lot of different ways that all these Pokemon could be played on both sides. And that could be a bit confusing, but it's really cool to see how both of the trainers maybe navigate that, and it's matchup dependent as well.
trademark flexibility that we often see players aiming for in the World Championships, trying to get a nice hybrid between enough defensive backbone that you aren't relying on really hard reads every turn and that you can handle a bad position, but still having that potential for enough offense to really push through something that you haven't planned around. And having that extra, like, 30% damage as an option on the Zamazenta seems like it could be really interesting here if we're trying to pick up KOs on the Miraidon, do a little more damage to that Urshifu. And so it'll be interesting to see then, with this range of options that these players have for going all in on offense, having a little bit more bulk, where they sort of decide to land in terms of like pacing and offensive pressure throughout the game.
And I mean, even you were surprised by it. The Terra Fighting body press there on the Zamazenta is a super interesting choice, right? Like, we're talking about these defensive and offensive options. A Trostalization like that isn't necessarily defensive Trostalization, something like the Water or the Dragon that we normally see on the Zamazenta. Instead, leading into that more offensive, maybe leaning into the idea of the Shadow Rider more, just wanting to put your foot on the gas and do as much damage as possible, which honestly might be what you need if you're up against something like the Lunala teams, where they have a lot of bulk, and especially something like the Life Orb Miraidon might opt for more bulk to have that survivability against teams like these. So I'm really interested to see how that Terastallization might play out in this game. Not biased at all.
No, I'm really hoping we see it as well. I think it's just interesting to see, like, Kinugawa is playing a very well-established archetype. Like, the Zamazenta and the Calyrex, people all are prepared for, like, handling the damage that it can output. But if you instead go in and can do just a little bit more damage than everyone is expecting, suddenly you have all of these new options that, like, the game plans that your opponent has just aren't going to work. And I think with having the Life Orb on Calyrex and having the Terra Fighting on Zamazenta, you've got a lot of opportunity to see if you can maybe switch how Tsukide's team needs to be able to handle that matchup. If you can just do, like, turn some, like, 3-hit KOs into 2-hit KOs, you suddenly have a ton more options.
And I think that's a symptom here of the World Champions as well, is the World Championship as well, is where those small techs, right, you don't have to create something new. It's all about how can you innovate and optimize, I really think, these meta builds, where something like the Shadow Rider and Zamazenta team is seen everywhere. Like you said, it is the meta team, it is the team to beat, but just upping your damage, even just by a little bit, really could be the make or break. As we get into our game one here, Yuma's going to be leading off of the Calyrex, Shadow Rider, and the Zamazenta, and Ko with the Lunala and the Miraidon, both trainers here leading off with their restricteds, as we've seen a lot here at the World Championship so far.
If you were wondering how many restricteds each player is allowed to use, it's just everything that's on the field now. Everyone has brought all of their strongest, highest base stat total Pokemon right at the beginning, which gives us a really volatile first turn. There's a ton of potential for a lot of damage from either side. I guess the crucial piece is there's that mind game on whether the Lunala goes for a wide guard to block the Calyrex Astro Barrage, or if something else happens. We're going to see...
And wide guard it will not go for, as a protect instead for the Zamazenta will play out, but a wide guard from Lunala instead. Both making defensive plays there, maybe wanting to block something like the Astro Barrage there. As a move there from the Miraidon goes into the Zamazenta, and the Calyrex is actually going to go for a single target move, the Psychic into the Miraidon to do a sizable chunk.
So that's a huge reveal that I do want to shout out here. The Miraidon being faster than the Calyrex, maybe giving us some information that Calyrex is either like a bit bulkier or maybe a modest variant, really playing into that ability to do just a little more damage than expected. I think that's a really good strength for a lot of other Pokemon on Tsukide's team, but it's a huge opportunity for the Miraidon on Tsukide's side to cause a lot of problems. It has that really fast Volt Switch now that's going to outspeed both Pokemon on Kinugawa's side.
Yeah, and being able to outspeed something like the Shadow Rider is really, really important, as you mentioned, to be able to get out. And, you know, you could use Protect, or you could just do a little bit of damage to get out, as the Calyrex is going to start to chip itself down with something like the Life Orb. You know, the Lunala isn't going to go for a wide guard again. Instead, the Miraidon is going to go straight for a Draco Meteor, knowing it's faster. Getting the knockout there on the Calyrex is super impactful. Being able to get rid of Restricted on this turn is amazing. And even if you trade it for something like a Body Press there in, but actually maybe playing around the Protect and Heavy Slamming to break the Shadow Shield there on the Lunala, as a Moongeist there from Ko's Lunala is going to fire back with a Moongeist Beam and do a sizable chunk there to the Zamazenta.
That's a huge hit for Kinugawa's side, losing that Calyrex Shadow Rider. There is maybe a little bit of board pressure here because the Miraidon has lost that special attack boost from having that Draco Meteor going off. But looking at what Kinugawa has in the back, it's going to be really hard to get through this Lunala. Sure, you've broken the Shadow Shield, and you do have a lot of damage from that Raging Bolt, but Raging Bolt is sort of the only damage that you have that's going to work into that Lunala with it being immune to Body Press. So I'm really curious to see where Kinugawa is going to be able to find that damage now that that Calyrex Shadow Rider is gone.
And with the Shadow Rider being gone, we see Yuma maybe hover over an Electric-type move there. It's also really important to note that Ko has kind of helped Yuma in a bit of a way, setting that Electric Train, boosting up the damage of that Raging Bolt even more with the booster energy, with the Terra Electric. Yuma's Raging Bolt is going to be able to do so much damage, so maybe in combination with a Heavy Slam, you're able to get a knockout on the Lunala, which could potentially be super big in terms of the trades of this turn here, but it really is going to come down to what Ko wants to lock in here, right? You got this special attack drop on your Miraidon after going for the Draco Meteor. Maybe you want to swap it out and preserve it, knowing how fast you are is super important. We're actually going to see a swap, though, from the Lunala on Ko's side into a different Pokemon, and that Pokemon's going to be the Ursaluna. It's actually be immune to those electric-type attacks, as we see Yuma go for the Terastallization here, and because that's an electric-type move into that Lunala slot, this is a free switch for Ko, and being immune means you're going to take no damage compared to even a small chip. Being immune is such a huge thing, and Volt Switch there, the flexibility of being able to change moves allows Ko to pivot out the Miraidon into a different Pokemon as well. And if this is something like the Lunala, means you're going to have two immune Pokemon, one to Body Press and one to the electric type move. So if this turn plays out in Ko's favor, this could be a huge turn of momentum for them.
Yeah, Tsukide really playing well with the pivots here. Having that immune switch in for the Ursaluna, and then potentially also being able to go back into that Lunala. I guess the big risk is Tsukide, we know what Kinugawa has locked into, but Tsukide doesn't. And so there's this risk now of, like, if somehow there was a read on Kinugawa's side, and there's an electric attack going into the Miraidon slot, that's a really risky way to bring in that Lunala. But as we see this play out, that's the first attack into an immunity, Body Press from Zamazenta, and the second attack into an immunity. So Tsukide has taken 0 damage now and set up that Ursaluna with the Flame Orb boost and just avoided a whole lot of the pressure that Kinugawa had on this turn. So really interesting questions now in terms of Kinugawa had a way to find damage last turn and still has a lot of pressure into these Pokemon, but having given that Miraidon a chance to switch out, I think the position game is maybe a little bit more interesting now. Like, Kinugawa can take KOs, but you need to worry about the Miraidon coming back in again later.
And this is exactly what we were talking about before, that balance between offensive and defensive. Now Yuma has to kind of find a position and a way to get enough effective damage there to get rid of what they deem as the more important Pokemon, right? This Ursaluna could be threatening super effective damage both into the Raging Bolt and to the Zamazenta and do so much. The Body Press there, yeah, the Ursaluna is going to be able to hang on. You are kind of forced to double it if you are Yuma, but Moongeist Beam there is going to fire off into the Zamazenta. Not able to finish off, though. The Zamazenta hangs on as well as the Raging Bolt follows up with a Dragon Pulse into Ko's Ursaluna, and it's going to get knocked out. But that's a huge survival for Yuma Zamazenta, because that means Ko now has to target it down again to finish it off, and the Raging Bolt gets to live maybe another turn.
Yeah, that's huge. You were talking earlier about Zamazenta having this nice balance of being a really bulky Pokemon, but still having a lot of offensive pressure, and that's absolutely being showcased here. That 4 HP survival really changes things. I feel like if Zamazenta goes down too early here, Kinugawa is just way too far behind to really be able to come back, but now having that Pokemon on the field gives just a lot more options. I guess the caveat now is, though, as we were discussing last turn, now that the Miraidon can come back in, it has a whole lot of pressure now. It's reset its special attack drops. It can take KOs pretty much anywhere it likes with Draco Meteor. And the onus is on Kinugawa to find a way around this, like, turn of really heavy pressure from Tsukide.
And I'm really curious now that you're not able to follow up with a Moongeist Beam on Ko's side into the Raging Bolt, I'm wondering if you can maybe potentially live a Draco Meteor on Yuma's Raging Bolt. Because if you can, considering it's Life Orb or choice instead of Choice Specs, that little bit it could matter. But instead, we're going to see a Thunderclap there into the Lunala, doing a nice sizable chunk there. There is the Draco Meteor from Ko's Miraidon. It is enough, though, to just knock out, even with the Terastallization. Unfortunately, Yuma's Raging Bolt is not able to live that Draco Meteor. I guess being not taking neutral damage is still not enough to survive something like a Draco Meteor from a Miraidon. But that Heavy Slam, being able to knock out the Lunala, like you emphasize that survival on the Zamazenta, really is paying dividends for Yuma here, allowing them to get back into the game. And Rillaboom here is going to be the Pokemon of choice. No more Terrain War to be fought. Yuma is going to get the last say, and Grassy Terrain is going to be the last one standing as Rillaboom and Incineroar come in, and Fake Out is going to be the available for both trainers here.
Yeah, so I think this is a great position for Kinugawa. You have to get around this particular turn where there's still the Fake Out pressure, but after that, this Miraidon, it has benefited so much from being able to switch moves, but that Life Orb recoil has really added up, and it's definitely in range of a Grassy Glide KO now. So as long as you can make it through this turn, suddenly there's an opportunity for the Zamazenta to be able to get one more attack off next turn with the Grassy Glide covering the Miraidon and the Incineroar's Fake Out pressure lost. So Kinugawa has a pretty solid win condition to move towards, getting that one big attack from the Zamazenta off into the Incineroar slot.
And it's kind of interesting as well. This is where something like the choice specs maybe is a little bit nicer, where you might want that extra damage. Yes, you can change moves and potentially go for another attack, but because you are Life Orb, unless you protect this turn, if you go for an attack, you're actually going to get dropped to your own Life Orb chip. But we are going to see a Terrestrialization, which hasn't been used on Ko's side of the field at all this turn, as the Incineroar is going to go for that Terra Bug, actually going to be able to live those body presses now, which is actually super impactful in this end game here, right? Even though the Zamazenta was able to hang on, it's not going to be able to do super effective against the damage against the Incineroar anymore, as Fake Out is going to go off into the Miraidon, though, and finish it off. So depending on what this Incineroar goes for, we still have an end game here for both of our players. Even with Rillaboom and Zamazenta, because both of their moves are going to be resistant into this Incineroar, it's going to actually be a very close end game here.
Yeah, absolutely. I was blanking on the Terra. That's such a huge difference in this match. I think if that had been like a Flare Blitz or a knockoff into the Rillaboom slot, things would be looking really close. As it stands, Kinugawa does still have the Pokemon advantage, and so there's a few opportunities to attack into this resistance. We'll have to see how much damage they do, though. This is a pretty crucial question here. Looks like Woodhammer going into the Incineroar doing good damage, but I think the Zamazenta tried to go for a double protect and then failed, which means that not taking that opportunity to go for a body press, instead trying to get that extra turn of Woodhammer damage. And now things are looking definitely in Tsukide's favor, having gotten rid of that Zamazenta for no damage penalty there.
Absolutely, and the Rillaboom being at -1 attack as well, thanks to that Incineroar's Intimidate, means that Yuma is going to have to maybe fish for a critical hit here to have a chance at getting back in the game. The Woodhammer not even bringing Incineroar down to 50%. A Flare Blitz here, though, from Ko's Incineroar firing off into that Rillaboom. Oh, it's actually a U-turn there, using the fact that they're Terra Bug to do more damage and have that same type of attack bonus on that U-turn, as well as not taking Flare Blitz chip, is super smart from Ko, knowing that you're going to be able to round out this game anyways. Yeah, that Woodhammer is not doing much, and actually, I believe the Rillaboom, it doesn't knock itself out, but U-turn actually going to be the final move there for Ko as they wrap up and take game 1 here.
With the double critical hit, just for some fashion there. That was a really phenomenal endgame played by Tsukide. I totally called the game wrong. I think that Bug Terra just gave so many options on Tsukide's side. As you mentioned, that Terra Bug into going for the U-turn specifically was just such a big deal. It prevents taking all of that recoil damage that otherwise would have made that endgame really close. And instead, like, the Rillaboom really had to be fishing for critical hits there to do enough damage. I mean, Kinugawa saw the writing on the wall, figured that he needed to get a double protect to even have a chance in that endgame. Like, that Incineroar at the end, being just the right type with that sort of Terra at the end, was just so impactful for this game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you get the double protect, maybe you get 1 or 2 Woodhammer critical hits, and the Incineroar for some reason goes for Flare Blitz instead of the U-turn, you can maybe get away. But yeah, that Terra Bug was just able to live all those hits and making something like the body press resisted, as well as the Woodhammer. I mean, you have that already because you're an Incineroar, but being able to resist that initial body press kind of forced you into an awkward position where you have to go for that double protect. You don't really have a way to do meaningful damage to this Incineroar, and that endgame is immediately flipped on its head, even if you're up an extra Pokemon with full HP.
Yeah, I think really going to be interesting to see what Kinugawa comes up with, knowing that that's an option. Like, maybe if you can force a Terra a little bit earlier, you don't have to worry about that Incineroar endgame. I am really curious if we managed to see damage rolls. I think it would have been pretty close if the Zamazenta went for an attack that last turn. I don't think that Kinugawa could have won, but knowing if you just need like a little bit of chip and then suddenly you can take care of the Incineroar seems like really good information to be collecting in this next game. With that said, I think the big onus now on Kinugawa is to try to take care of that Miraidon a little bit sooner. It took KOs on the other two Pokemon such that nothing left could even handle the Bug-type Incineroar. And so I think Kinugawa really needs to have a game plan here for how to stop that Miraidon from getting off quite so many Life Orb, Electric Terrain boosted Draco Meteors.
Absolutely, and I think what, they did a great job of doing is positioning that game, right? Being able to weave in those attacks with the Miraidon, not even going for protects, really, just hard swapping into something like the Ursaluna, or maybe using Lunala to swap in and out. We're able to find really, really well-positioned spots where they can fire off those attacks with the Miraidon. As we get into our game 2 here of Yuma versus Ko, Yuma leading off with the Calyrex Shadow Rider and the Smeargle swapping out one of the restricteds for the lovely little dog, and Ko with the Lunala and Miraidon, knowing that it worked game 1 and sticking with it.
Yes, this is a really interesting adjustment from Kinugawa. The Smeargle having that fake out pressure to buy a little bit of time for that Calyrex since the Miraidon is otherwise outspeeding it, and then also having the Follow Me to redirect all of that single target damage from Miraidon. I am still curious to see, Kinugawa has to find a way to do significant damage while still contending with the Lunala's threat of a Moongeist Beam into the Calyrex slot and contending with the Lunala's threat of a Wide Guard. So we are going to just see that Calyrex swapping out, really trying to avoid the pressure from that Lunala.
And being, super effective, the Moongeist Beam into that Calyrex Shadow Rider, you maybe don't want to use a Follow Me this turn and want to go for something like the Fake Out instead. Could be super impactful, and just having the option to swap out there is very valuable from Yuma. But Ko actually is going to swap out there with the Volt Switch, bringing Smeargle down to its Focus Sash. That leads me to believe if you swap in Rillaboom here to reset that terrain and set up your Grassy Terrain, this could be a potential Spore, and if you Spore the right slot, this could be very, very impactful for Yuma, as we see Ko swap in the Ursaluna, and this is a Spore into that slot. That means that Flame Orb is not going to be activated, but is instead a Spore into the Lunala. Still impactful, means the Moongeist Beam isn't going to be doing super effective damage against your Calyrex Shadow Rider, and you don't have to use a Terastallization now that the Lunala is asleep. And very importantly as well, because the Lunala went for a Wide Guard, means it moved before Smeargle, and it's not going to actually burn a turn of sleep, where otherwise if it went for a Trick Room, it maybe would have burned a turn of sleep there. But actually, the fact that you're able to guarantee that the Lunala is going to sleep this turn is very, very important, I think, here for Yuma, as you threaten damage with something like the Woodhammer, or even if you want to swap out U-Turn.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty ideal turn from Kinugawa's side, being able to stop that Lunala for as much time as possible. Like, the Wide Guard was wasted, and now it has burned 0 turns of sleep, as you mentioned. I think that Ursaluna being able to get on the field and get its Flame Orb activated does pose some problems. You can't put it to sleep with the Smeargle anymore. And now Kinugawa does have damage options into Ursaluna with the Rillaboom, but a Terastallization could totally change that. And also Ursaluna just maybe even has enough bulk to be able to take one attack from that Rillaboom. So we're going to have to see a pivot here, bringing that Calyrex Shadow back onto the field.
And the Shadow Rider will enter the field once again, going to be able to threaten so much damage on the board, as that one hammer is actually going to be able to pick up that one-hit KO. No critical hit needed. As the Ursaluna goes down, that Flame Orb is activated, but didn't get a chance to move this turn, and I think Yuma will take that trade in a heartbeat, as the Lunala takes another turn, or its first turn of sleep, I should say, for Ko. But this Calyrex Shadow Rider is now perfectly positioned here for Yuma. Even if the Miraidon comes back in here, it is going to get the last say on the train, as Rillaboom is on the field, but you're going to be able to do so much damage with this Shadow Rider if the Lunala does not wake up for Ko, meaning you can't go for a Wide Guard, and something like an Astral Barrage from Yuma just could spell the end for Ko.
Yeah, if there's an Astral Barrage coming out and Lunala doesn't wake up in time to Wide Guard, that's almost just game over for Tsukide. The Miraidon coming in, having previously established that it's a lot faster, that is going to be a concern for Kinugawa's side. I think the Rillaboom really needs to find a way to be able to pivot out here, and the Calyrex might have to play a little bit defensively, just because there's that. I'm sure Kinugawa is considering how quickly he lost that Calyrex Shadow in the first game with that Miraidon being able to get off the Hadron Engine Draco Meteor.
Yeah, and this is kind of a tricky spot because you really haven't gotten to use your Spore or your Sleep turns effectively. You really haven't done any damage to Lunala. It's kind of gotten these turns to burn its Sleep turns and work its way through this Sleep. And again, Koa's kind of found this position where Miraidon is threatening so much damage into both slots. Had the last say in the terrain. Being able to fire off attack is so important. Ko calling the Protect, though, going for just a straight Draco Meteor into the Rillaboom means there's going to be no option of even resetting that terrain if you're Yuma. And Ko, again, making these decisions where you just kind of delete a slot is so impactful because, again, this Lunala now got to burn another turn of Sleep. And you really haven't gotten to do anything with it if you're Yuma here. Yes, you can bring in something like the Zamazenta, and Ko might have to swap out the Miraidon again, but if we know what's in the back, if it's anything like Game 1, it could be the Incineroar again, and with that Terra Bug could be very dangerous for Yuma.
Yeah, Tsukide still having the Incineroar in the back and still not having Burn Terra definitely puts the pressure onto Kinugawa here. I will say, losing the Rillaboom is really tough for Kinugawa, but there is some additional momentum this turn because the Miraidon is back down at -2 special attack. It's not threatening that KO onto Calyrex Shadow Rider. I'm not sure if Kinugawa has a way to handle if the Lunala wakes up this turn. It's a 50% chance, and that Wide Guard would really prevent the Calyrex from doing much. But if Kinugawa is lucky with the Sleep turns, I feel like this is the moment that he has to be able to really get some damage on the board with that Miraidon no longer being able to threaten the KO.
And speaking of moments, I believe we saw Yuma lock in Fake Out into Ko's Lunala, predicting maybe a Terastallization instead of the Incineroar on the Lunala, knowing that it has a chance to wake up this turn. It is very likely to wake up this turn. If a Protect goes off into that Lunala, if it Terastallizes, means it's going to get faked out and not going to be able to go for a Wide Guard, which could be super impactful. Instead of targeting something like the Miraidon is actually an interesting choice here, as Ko actually swaps out the sleeping Miraidon or Lunala into the Incineroar to instead resist the Astral Barrage, not burning Terastallization, which I think Ko has done an excellent job at doing this game.
Yeah, preserving that Terra for a little bit longer is excellent, especially because of that Fake Out play that you mentioned. We are going to see the Miraidon, though, going for the Terastallization, getting that Electric Terra. We're going to have to see how much damage it can do if it's going for either a Volt Switch or an Electro Drift. Even at -2 with the terrain and everything, that might be quite a bit of damage as the Fake Out goes into the Incineroar, not the Miraidon, and that's going to be an Electro Drift into, I think if that's the Calyrex, we're going to have to see how much damage that does. Ah! Calyrex is looking really low now.
Yeah, and that's so much damage. I think, like you said, that -2 there from the Draco Meteor, having fired off into the Rillaboom really is impactful because now you're not able to get the knockout there on the Calyrex. And that means your Miraidon's going to go down. And, you know, we just highlighted that Ko was really good at using Terastallization and preserving it, but not being able to preserve it there and having to kind of click it to do meaningful damage to this Shadow Rider means your sleeping Lunala in the back is now going to have to take super effective damage from this Astral Barrage, and if you don't wake up, that could just be the end of this game too.
Yeah, I think now the game is very much down to, can Lunala wake up in time to Wide Guard? If it can, then this Calyrex is going to be able to be KO'd by the Incineroar, and then I think Lunala should have the ability to clean up for the rest of the game. But if it doesn't wake up, that's just the Astral Barrage, and that's down to just Incineroar, and Incineroar no longer has that Terra option. So Zamazenta is looking pretty happy in the back, ready to take on that Incineroar.
Yeah, and that's something we really haven't gotten the highlight because, well, we haven't seen it. The Lunala, though, unfortunately is going to stay asleep, which means Yuma is going to be able to fire off an Astral Barrage here into both these Pokemon, as a Follow Me from Smeargle is going to be the move of choice, redirecting any of those attacks from the Incineroar. Astral Barrage here at +1, I believe, should just be able to knock out the Lunala, even through that Shadow Shield, just so much damage and 4 times weak. That Incineroar as well, even though it's resisted, took so much damage, and I think with Zamazenta in the back, Ko has to know that this is going to be game 2 for Yuma.
Yeah, I think that the Miraidon not being able to do even just a little more damage to that Calyrex really cost Tsukide. I think that gave Kinugawa exactly what he needed. Although at the end of the day, I think if that Lunala had woken up and gone for the Wide Guard, it was still pretty close. So we're going to see these players get ready for that game 3, but this game 2 was super close. Like, I feel like both players have a ton of options going into this next game to try to see how they can get that little bit of an edge so that it's not just a coin flip deciding things at the end.
And I feel like that was a very deceptive turn. I want to highlight the Rillaboom and the Calyrex Shadow Rider being on the field against the Miraidon. It just swapped in, was threatening Draco Meteor against both threats. I think correctly identifying the fact that even if your Rillaboom goes down there, yes, you don't get terrain control, but the Miraidon goes to -2, meaning you're able to live the following Electric Drift, which you saw was actually the reason they were able to win the game. And that was super important. And I guess worst case scenario, right? You got to bring in the Smeargle, you have fake out pressure. It's not the end of the world if you can't get terrain. So mitigating the damage either through terrain, if the Rillaboom had survived that turn, you get to swap back in, or the fact that you have the fake out and the Miraidon is -2. You kind of win that trade in the end game if you are Yuma, and that really worked out in their favor.
Yeah, I think the Draco Meteor into the Rillaboom was very much an example of winning the turn but losing the game. I think as soon as that Miraidon was down to -2, there were still options Tsukide had, but things were just so far in Kinugawa's favor. I think even at the end there, if that Lunala had woken up, I still think things are pretty tough for Tsukide. You can go for the follow me with the Smeargle like we saw, and then there's just so many opportunities to just keep going for Astral Barrage until the Zamazenta hits the field. So we're going to have to see how players adjust now. We've seen that Tsukide has the damage, but has to figure out that targeting correctly to not get overwhelmed by this Calyrex in the end. And we are going to see the Smeargle showing up again on Kinugawa's side.
And I think Yuma keeping with their lead in game 2, I mean, if it worked for them and that adjustment was able to win them that game, I don't see a reason why not to switch it up. And I think Ko's double restricted lead there of the Miraidon and Lunala also makes a lot of sense, right? You want to do so much damage as you highlighted there, and that Life Orb Miraidon definitely does a lot of damage. I think also, as well as we highlighted in game 1, being faster than both the Zamazenta and the Calyrex is so important. Being able to either pivot out or just get the straight up knockout with something like the Draco Meteor is so impactful, as we just see a fake out there into the Miraidon, disrespecting that Protect, and the Lunala going for a wide guard against a potential Astral Barrage. But the move of choice there from Yuma is going to be the Astral Barrage there, being blocked from the wide guard there on Ko.
So I really liked that play from Kinugawa, but it was great on Tsukide to sort of stay safe and avoid that concern. I think thinking about how the last game played out, there was a lot of pressure, I think, on Tsukide to not go for wide guard here, because if there's that pivot into a Rillaboom and a Spore, then the Lunala goes to sleep without burning any of its sleep turns. And so I think Kinugawa, looking at that, was like, ooh, maybe I can get away with an Astral Barrage that would have been game-winning if that had been able to go off. But Tsukide really correctly just calling that and staying safe and going for that wide guard gives Tsukide a lot of options now that Fake Out has been burned and not really much progress has been made on Kinugawa's side.
Yeah, and I think this next turn is just as impactful as the first. While you don't have fake out pressure now, you still have to decide if you want to go for a follow me or potentially go for the same play as you did game 1 or game 2 and go for a swap into Rillaboom. But we're actually going to see the preservation of the Focus Sash there on the Smeargle and getting the terrain anyways as you swap in the Rillaboom, resetting your fake out, preserving the Smeargle. Another wide guard from Ko's Lunala, though, really doesn't want to get Astral Barrage down, which makes a lot of sense considering how much does. Volt Switch, though, wanting to break that Focus Sash in the Smeargle, instead targeting into the Rillaboom for Ko, and that means Miraidon's going to be able to get to swap out into maybe a more favorable piece there for Ko.
Yeah, nice to get the Miraidon out safely. It's really dangerous if Tsukide ever takes too much damage onto it. And we are going to see that MVP Incineroar from Tsukide's side being able to hit the field in a position that's just pretty much perfect for it. It has so much pressure here on the other side. I think it's actually going to also be... oh no, it's just the Astral Barrage coming out from the Calyrex Shadow. So Lunala correctly, again, just keeping that wide guard up while the partner slot pivots to something more useful for this particular board state.
But just as you were saying, or about to say, I should say, the Astral Barrage was coming out there. Makes a lot of sense to just wide guard, but that Incineroar swapping in makes a lot of sense considering the other move on the Calyrex is Psychic. Being able to be immune with that on the Incineroar was very smart from Ko there, and being able to swap the Incineroar means you have fake out pressure into the Rillaboom, and if you are Yuma, you have to fake out the Incineroar if you want to be able to move first, or you might have to swap out if you value that terrain. So, you know, this game is a lot more slow than the other two games, which were kind of very fast-paced, and both players just went for attacks or aggressive spores. Both players here going for defensive plays, and really no damage has been done this game as Yuma swaps out the Rillaboom into the Zamazenta there, getting that +1 thanks to that Dauntless Shield as the Calyrex goes for a Protect there on Yuma's side. Really curious what Ko's going to go for. Has it revealed to be the U-turn on that Incineroar, pivoting out once again. Again, both players playing very, very defensively this game, it seems.
And I think with that Incineroar going before the Lunala, if I'm correct, that probably means the Lunala is setting up a Trick Room. So this might be one of those perfectly positioned Ursaluna situations where it's going to come in, get the Flame Orb to activate, and then Lunala is going to set up Trick Room. If so, that gives Tsukide so much momentum going into the rest of the game. Having the Lunala speed order better than the Calyrex would be huge. And also, like, correctly calling that on the third turn when Tsukide has gone for Wide Guard every other time. This is just phenomenal. There was so much risk of an Astro Barrage there, but Tsukide correctly calling that the Trick Room could safely go up here, trusting that Shadow Shield, trusting the pressure of the Incineroar. Now this Ursaluna has 4 turns of Trick Room where it can just go for as many Headlong Rushes and Earthquakes as it wants.
And, you know, Headlong Rush and Facade and all those big damaging moves are going to be really hard for Yuma to kind of navigate. Yes, you have the Zamazenta there with the +1 defense to maybe be able to eat a couple attacks, but being super effective with that Guts boost as well. Ursaluna does so much damage, you would think that that +1 does a lot. You might be able to live 3 attacks, 2 attacks, but sometimes you barely live the one if in combination with something like Lunala. And, you know, even more than the Zamazenta, the Calyrex that we just saw swap out for Yuma was in risk of taking damage as well, and a double up. And with one not wanting to burn Terrestrialization there, swaps into the Rillaboom to maybe pressure Fake Out the following turn, as Ursaluna there goes for the Terra Ghost, wanting to be immune to not only the Fake Out, but more importantly, the body press there from Yuma's Zamazenta. And that means this Ursaluna is going to be able to go for whatever attacks it wants, as Headlong Rush doing so much damage to that Rillaboom there. Yes, it goes down in defenses, but that wasn't even a critical hit, but a resisted hit into the Rillaboom doing over 50% is just so much. And the Moon Guys chipping down that Zamazenta is just so impactful for Ko, and being able to, as you said, do so much damage under this Trick Room is insane.
So I think that this turn played out is just a testament to how strong Tsukide's positioning is. I think Kinugawa got that turn almost perfect in terms of the best way that it could have gone. And the best way that could have gone was losing half of Rillaboom's hit points and like a third of Zamazenta's hit points and doing like 10% to Lunala. It definitely sets things up for future turns, but I think just like being in that situation where you have to take these huge hits from the Ursaluna is really tough for Kinugawa's side. And I think now both of these Pokemon are starting to get worn down to the point where they really have to worry. I don't know that there's a lot of Pokemon Kinugawa has that can at this point now take a Headlong Rush. I think just about anything except the Smeargle with its Focus Sash is going to be KO'd if Headlong Rush goes into that slot. And that's going to be tough for Kinugawa to position around.
And the problem that Yuma has that Ko maybe doesn't suffer from is that, as we see the Facade going off in the Rillaboom, there is no real defensive swap. You already swapped in your Zamazenta, which would be your defensive pivot, to kind of maybe eat one of these attacks, but not swapping in is so important. Being able to not have a defensive pivot means Ko is able to kind of steamroll through the rest of Yuma's team. And I want to highlight there as well is that Ko didn't go for a Moongeist Beam, instead going for Moonblast, maybe playing around the fact that Yuma has the potential swap into that Smeargle. If Smeargle does come in for that Rillaboom slot and you go for a Moongeist Beam, you could potentially live on your Focus Sash and maybe go for an attack or a Follow Me next turn, but doubling it with the Moonblast there just made sure that that slot got knocked out.
Yeah, I think it was a really good heads-up play. The damage with Moongeist Beam versus Moonblast wasn't going to be super consequential, but stopping that Smeargle from getting in safely was going to matter a lot, because that Follow Me with a Focus Sash is really Kinugawa's main way of managing the damage that Tsukide has. I think I also want to highlight there, I think that was a critical hit Heavy Slam into the -1 defense Ursaluna, and this Ursaluna is still at more than half hit points. Like, it's really tough for Kinugawa to be able to find damage into the Ursaluna right now. It's a really good testament to Tsukide picking the right Pokemon for the job, getting the right position, and setting up that Terrestrialization on the Ursaluna. I think the Calyrex definitely puts out some pressure now, especially with some Terrestrialization options, but the momentum is definitely still very much on Tsukide's side, as we see Kinugawa continuing to try to switch around through this Trick Room.
Yeah, and navigating this Trick Room really is the story of this game 3, as we see a Protect there from the Calyrex really trying to find a way out of this Trick Room, and Ursaluna is going to attack into that slot, and most likely a double up there from Ko, but actually Moonblast there into this Miracle is going to be super impactful. Being able to break that Focus Sash is so important. We talked about how important it was to maybe preserve that, to redirect attack from this Ursaluna. You'll be able to redirect one now, but you won't hang on is the problem, and with something like the Lunala staring you down, a Moongeist Beam could spell the end for this Calyrex Shadow Rider if it doesn't go for a Terrestrialization on this turn. And I believe being the last turn of Trick Room here, Ko was able to really use every single turn of Trick Room to its maximum, and really was able to, you know, maximize on that and do so much damage with the Ursaluna.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think this Ursaluna's really done so much damage with just a couple of turns in Trick Room. With that Smeargle losing its Focus Sash, I think that's a really good heads-up play from Tsukide. It really stops the option for just redirecting and attacking with the Calyrex. It puts a lot of pressure to be considering that Terrestrialization on Kinugawa's side, but we're seeing no Terrestrialization and a Wide Guard to block the Astral Barrage from Tsukude's side of the field.
Wow, and a Wide Guard makes a lot of sense, because if Ko locked in something like the Earthquake, you'd be able to block your Lunala from taking damage and block something like the Astral Barrage. But we instead see Ko going for a single target move there into this Miracle, just wanting to get rid of it. No fancy games. And if the Calyrex locked in Astral Barrage there, yeah, it's going to get blocked by Ko's Wide Guard. And that's so impactful, because that means both of these super effective targets, which you otherwise hit for Yuma, you're going to be able to do no damage now, and Ko's going to get to live another turn.
Yeah. I think there's been 3 Astral Barrages this game now that have gone off into Tsukude's side, and every single time Tsukide has called it correctly and set up the Wide Guard. That was just extraordinarily well played. I think Kinugawa had a really interesting idea there, maybe hoping that the Ursaluna would go for an Earthquake to try to finish up this Miracle. And I thought that Wide Guard was a really neat play, but it looks like it didn't pay off now, and now it's down to just 2 Pokemon on Kinugawa's side, where we've seen it's really hard for the Zamazenta to get meaningful damage off into that Ursaluna. That Heavy Slam is just not doing a lot of damage into that very heavy Pokemon. So we're going to have to see the speed advantages on Kinugawa's side now, but there's so much that can go wrong still. Like, there are so many ways for Zamazenta and Calyrex to be KO'd, and it's very difficult for them to find safe damage into the other side of the field.
And we're going to see Ursaluna here swap out for Ko into a Pokemon that is going to be revealed here, the Incineroar, a very nice defensive pivot. Very importantly as well, the Lunala is back at full, taking damage from that Heavy Slam, has been healed up thanks to that Grassy Train, as it goes for another Wide Guard to block an Astral Barrage, not wanting to take any sort of damage, as the Calyrex there for Yuma goes for a Nasty Plot, maybe wanting to find a turn if you're going to Wide Guard, I'm going to take advantage of that, and start going for Nasty Plot, so that when I call the turn that you don't go for Wide Guard, I'm able to just kind of delete your board. And if Yuma's able to find a position where they can click Astral Barrage and get off the damage that they're setting up with these Nasty Plots, this game could immediately flip in their favor. But, you know, as long as Ko plays honestly and gets a free swap maybe into something like the Miraidon, this is still a game for both players.
Oh, I'm seeing Kinugawa hovering the thing we were hoping would come out this game. And yep, we're going to see that Terrestrialization of the Zamazenta into the Fighting type. This is a bit of a desperate play, I think. Like, it really needs to get the KO on Incineroar for Kinugawa to have options here. But if it does, there's a ton of damage potential from this Zamazenta. We're going to see the Wide Guard go out. I think it's sort of forced at this point with that Nasty Plot having gone up on the Calyrex side. We're going to see the Astral Barrage go into that Wide Guard, just keeping Tsukide honest. But this Terra Fighting boosting the Zamazenta's damage, it doesn't have the defense boost, so it probably won't KO, but maybe it will. If it's able to take out this Incineroar, that's going to be huge for Kinugawa, and yeah, that's going to be a KO on the Incineroar.
And that's super dangerous, because now Yuma has so much pressure, right? These defensive Pokemon that we've seen fight to get out of Trick Room, Yuma now has this offensive position with the Terra Fighting Body Press Zamazenta and the +2 Nasty Plot it Calyrex Shadow. And Miraidon, yes, it's faster, but it has to pick a target. It doesn't have the flexibility of a sprint type attack like Calyrex does. It has to pick a target in which it wants to Draco Meteor. The only downside is that Yuma doesn't have a swap anymore into something like the Rillaboom or the Smeargle. It has to, both these Pokemon have to stick it out. And Ko most likely will go for a standard play of just Wide Guard to block against the Astral Barrage, but it really comes down to what this Miraidon wants to lock into for Ko.
Yeah, I think there's also, I don't know if we'll see it, but there's an interesting potential here. Miraidon's sort of pinning both of the slots. It can KO them unless they protect. There's an opportunity to try to set up Trick Room here with the Lunala, because it can then underspeed and KO both of these Pokemon. We are going to see an Electro Drift going out, correctly reading that the Protect was in the Zamazenta slot and not the Calyrex slot, so I think that's just going to straight up end the game. There's now just this poor Zamazenta facing down a whole lot of Ghost types on the other side of the field, plus a Miraidon.
Yeah, unfortunately. Oh, and they go for the play that you mentioned, the Trick Room there on Lunala, just to make sure that the Ursaluna gets in safely and is able to finish off the Zamazenta. Really well played there. Ko Tsukide is going to take our round 5 2-1. And that was such a phenomenal game. I think massively played, honestly, from both sides. And I think what really allowed them to succeed in that game, and the highlight of that match, was positioning. And it's a fundamental of Pokemon, and to have it displayed here at such a high level in the World Championships is so exciting to see. Being able to play that Miraidon and get it into a spot where it was able to win that end game there in that game 3, or in a game 1 where it was able to fire off those attacks and steamroll. Being able to make those decisions and really position their way to victory was amazing to see.
Yeah, I loved how Tsukide played that game. He established really early on that the Miraidon was a really good offensive threat, but that third game wasn't really about the Miraidon. It was all just about patience with the Lunala. It just sat on the field, it clicked Wide Guard like 10 times, I think maybe only 5 or 6, but still, and it just made sure that the Calyrex Shadow couldn't be a threat. And then Tsukide made the best use of Pokemon that weren't threatened by anything except the Calyrex Shadow Rider. That Ghost, Terra, Ursaluna into the Calyrex team, it just wound up being so useful because the Lunala was in a perfect position. I loved seeing these two incredible players play a really tough matchup. I think Tsukide really just made the best of having like exactly the right tools for this job, though, and it really showed why this is a former Seniors Division World Champion, now up to 5-0 at this tournament.
Yeah, and 5-0, hopefully they continue to do well, maybe even go undefeated. You never know. I think another thing about that match was really cool was the flexibility of the Terastallizations, right? We got to see the Terra fighting. Zambas had to go for that body press. Yes, it got the Oko onto the Incineroar. It was very nice. It did so much damage, but unfortunately it wasn't enough to, win out that game. And I think the flexibility of going for the Terra Electric into the Miraidon, or the Terastallization on the Ursaluna even, you had so much flexibility, and I think to keep Lunala unterastallized in the face of a Calyrex Shadow Rider is impressive, honestly. It takes real guts, no pun intended, to do that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. This Lunala, for 3 separate games, never terra'd in front of this Calyrex. It just trusted its Wide Guard, and it worked out perfectly. Yeah, I think that might be all we have to say about this particular match, but I'm really excited to be able to showcase 3 more matches for the whole rest of day 1 with you all. So make sure you don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after a break.